Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, I'm Zita Christian. Welcome to Page One. The challenge that many people face when they're writing a book that includes personal information is the desire to tell their story and at the same time keep some privacy. That's a challenge that our guest faced, our guest tonight. And what did she do? She picked up her pen and she wrote. And the result, her book came out in hardcover, sold at an auction for 6 figures to Doubleday, a huge press, and there is a second edition published by an academic press. And she's here tonight to tell us about the story. The title, Married Women Who Love Women. The author, my good friend Carren Strock. Carren, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you and I have a connection to a former crew member of ours, Liz Aylshire. We all met through the International Women's Writing Guild.
Right.
And I find it interesting that we are here tonight talking about your book, the original edition and the new edition, the second edition that has just come out from an academic press. And Liz was instrumental in getting you started on that book. So it's a nice tribute to her here for the show. Now, the book itself, Married Women Who Love Women, I think the title is self-explanatory, but tell me, why did you write it?
I was married for 25 years. I have a wonderful husband, 2 wonderful children. And one day I was having coffee with my best friend, and I looked across the table and I thought, oh my God, I'm in love with this woman. And I didn't know what to do about it, who to talk to, where to turn. Our friendship was based on such openness and such honesty that I found myself telling her. And she said, no, you're in love with the idea of sisterhood, of feminism. It's not me. Anyway, I went on a quest to find out. And I realized I'm a very gutsy person, and that was the most difficult time of my life.
I bet.
And if it was so difficult for me, it had to be worse for other women. And I started talking to women, and they started sending their friends to me. And then I realized that something had to be written. These women needed to know they weren't alone. I needed to know I wasn't alone. And this is before the computer was playing, the email and the internet played the part that it does today. I put flyers up. I put them in supermarkets, and I put them in movie theaters, in the ladies' restrooms. And wherever I could find somebody to talk to, I did. And what I found was women started calling me from across the country. Their friends were finding my flyers and sending them to their friends who they knew were in the same situation.
Well, Carren, let me ask you. You know how it is if you're asking someone for time or a contribution or a favor or anything, there's that little unspoken question on the part of the person hearing the request, and that is, what's in it for me? What did you put in the flyer that made the person reading it be able to answer that question in a way that said, I'm going to respond to this woman, I don't even know who she is?
I told them about myself. And what I found in speaking with women, I spoke to more than 100 women, as well as husbands and children. Many of them had been in therapy for years, and some had never even told their therapists that they were gay. Oh. That's how big a secret it was. But they shared with me because I shared my story with them. And many told me that I was the first person they were comfortable talking to.
So you have this information, you realize you're not alone, a big revelation for you. You've taken the gutsy risk to go put the flyers out there. Now you're getting information from other women all around the country. How did you sell that idea to the publisher? Or maybe, no, did you have an agent then? Did you have an agent at that point?
I went through, I think it was 7 or 9 different agents.
Oh my gosh.
The first time an agent said, I like the idea and I want to agent your book, I was so thrilled that I gave her the book. And then after a while, I realized we didn't see eye to eye. I had a chapter that started, it said, Married Women Who Love Women began as a tribute to a woman who had done what she needed to do to make her life complete. And this agent didn't like the word done. And I thought, my goodness, if we're going to be on the phone nitpicking over a word that is a totally correct in the usage. It just wasn't for me. Anyway, then I found another agent, and I called her 3 months later, and she hadn't gotten around to sending out my book yet.
Oh.
And on each agent there was a story with it. And I had seen an agent, not seen her, I had heard of an agent who I really wanted. When I called this woman, she said, "I'm sorry, I'm filled, and I have, no time for another client." But then I saw that she was doing a workshop at the American Society of Journalists and Authors, and I sent my manuscript in to be critiqued. And at the time, I went to the conference, and I walked over to her. I said, I sent in this manuscript, Married Women Who Love Women. She said, "I want to talk to you after this workshop." And they used my book for all the critiques, positive and negative, and I took notes on everything. And then when I went to her, she said, "I really love your writing, but first she said, it wouldn't be fair for you, your book, me, or my other clients for me to take you on because I just don't have the time." She said, "But if you come back in 4 months, if you don't find an agent within 4 months, then call me." So I ran home and I put my manuscript in the drawer and I circled in red on my calendar 4 months from that date. And that time passed and I called her and she said, "Well, to be quite truthful, I'm uncomfortable with the topic." So after all this time, in the interim, I had sent the book into one of the university presses, and they liked it. They sent it out to be critiqued, and it came back with a wonderful review, and they offered me a little bit of money. And my son, who's a writer in his own right, said, "Mom, don't do it, because if you get a very small advance, there's nothing in it for them to spread word of your book." Anyway, I called this agent back and I said, "I have a contract in hand. You like the way I write. If you don't want to represent me, would you please tell me who I could go to?" And she thought for a while and finally she gave me a name. And I prepared an elevator speech. That's like a 30-second.
Yes, your commercial. Yeah.
Agents are very much like doctors. After 30 seconds, they lose you. They don't want to hear anything more. And so I called her up and I gave her this speech and she said, "Send me a copy."
This is the agent
that ultimately sold my book.
Okay.
It went to a bidding war. It sold at auction. And so instead of mailing her the book, I took the subway into Manhattan. I live in Brooklyn before work, and I left it on her desk with her receptionist. And I got back to the office, and a couple of hours later, I got a phone call, and she said, "I picked it up. I couldn't put it down. I want 22 copies on Monday. I'm sending it to auction." It's like,
wow.
So, I mean, it sounds wonderful and easy, but I went through a lot of agents, and I was rejected by a great many agents in the interim, and I went through a lot of publishers that turned it down. So I just I kept with it, and it was my persistence and my determination that finally did it.
Do you know from any conversations with that agent what was it that she said when she put the manuscript out to auction? Because this book sold for 6 figures, hardcover, Doubleday. That's
Right.
huge. First book, that's just huge. So what was it? Did they say the subject matter is provocative, controversial, or timely, needed? Do you have any idea at all?
What she said, what they liked about it was that it didn't point fingers. It told it as it was. I don't tell anybody what to do in the book. I just share with them how other women, how their families, how their husbands have dealt with these issues.
Yeah. You know what, Carren, I'm thinking that this might be a good time to ask you to read page 1, plus
Sure.
a little more from the book. You're new to page 1, but whenever I have a writer on the show, with a new book, I like to ask him or her to read from the book. Gives us an idea of the writer's voice. So I have marked a little bit in here from the introduction, and I realize in the second edition you have both a new introduction and the original. So this is from the original introduction of the book. If you would share that with us.
Right. The second edition is it's everything that was in the first edition plus an additional 30 or 40%.
Okay.
Because new things were coming up. 1998, my weight plummeted and my clothes hung sloppily over my body. I could not have cared less, but at the insistence of my family, I found myself at Macy's. I had been instructed to buy some things that fit. Indifferently, I pulled a blouse over my head. Suddenly, I found myself sliding to the floor of the dressing room, choking back loud, anguished sobs. I sat with my back hunched over and my knees drawn to my chin, rocking back and forth. trying to muffle the cries I could not control. These involuntary outbursts were coming more frequently. I had to find help. I had to find someone to tell. Where could I turn? Who could I trust with this horrible secret? In the space of 6 months, my mind had become completely disordered. My value system had failed me. Suddenly I, who had been so sure about everything, knew nothing. I had fallen in love with another woman. My sister used to call me Pollyanna. I lived in a secure world protected by an invisible white picket fence. Mine was the perfect family. My husband and I were married in 1964 after we had dated for 3 years. I was 19 and he was 21. We felt certain enough of our maturity to take on the responsibilities of raising a family. Our babies came as we had planned. 2.5 years after our wedding, our son arrived. Then 2 years after him, our daughter. We moved to our home in the suburbs. Our door was open and friends and neighbors dropped in all of the time. I was great at stretching meals to accommodate unexpected guests. I was the one called when last-minute brownies were needed for the Girl Scouts, or when a chairperson was needed for a charity drive. While my kids were growing up, I was active in the Parent-Teacher Association, the Junior Women's Club, and Hadassah. I was so preoccupied with my husband and children and their needs that I was oblivious to my own, or to what was happening in the larger world. Eventually, my children grew up, and my husband and I moved to the city. And then I met Toby.
That's very powerful, and I know because we've been friends a long time, that powerful, life-changing event. And now, thanks to the book, not only are you sharing the information, which has to feel, I would assume, healing for you, but I think will prove to be a healing experience for many other people as well.
I'd like to share something
Yes.
briefly. In one of my early readings, a woman came up to me clutching the book and sobbing, and she said she had thought she was the only married woman ever to have fallen in love with another woman, didn't know where to go, who to turn to, who to talk to, and she thought the only thing she could do for her family was kill herself.
Gosh.
And the woman had planned her suicide for a night when she knew her husband and children were going to be home late.
Oh, Carren.
And she was walking home from work for what she thought would be the last time, and they were just putting this book in the window. And when she saw the title, she knew she wasn't alone. And she chose to
Oh,
live.
my
I can still see her
gosh. Oh,
face
my
in front of
gosh.
my eyes. I still get goose pimples when I share that story. So I know the book is important for a great many people.
Then getting the book into the right hands is an important decision that a publisher makes. And when the book came out, where did they put it? You know, you walk into a bookstore and there's self-help, maybe there, women's studies, maybe there, memoir. It's not technically memoir, but there's a lot of personal information in there. Mm-hmm. So where did the publisher put the book?
Initially, it went into gay and lesbian studies.
Okay.
And some of the bookstores did put it in women's studies, depending on what they, what sections, what categories they had in their shops.
And the second edition?
The second edition is women's studies, gender studies, gay and lesbian studies. I think it's women's issues. And hopefully it'll find its way into the classrooms.
Great. That's, yes, definitely into the classrooms. That would be perfect. You talked a little about finding the women to interview and about sending out the flyers. And as we mentioned, this was all before computers, before email. All this is, and that's, now people look at that and go, oh, fine, I'll put something on my Facebook page. But that was not an option then. Right. So you have the flyers and the material goes out. I'm assuming that people would, let's say they could write, they could phone. So did people phone you right away? Did you ever meet any of these people in person?
Yes. What I did is I made up a questionnaire, and I sent it out to a lot of the women who responded by notes or by phone. But then I found that talking to them face-to-face was much more productive and much more satisfying for them as well as for myself. So whoever was in the tri-state area, I set up appointments. I met them at luncheonettes or at places where we could grab a cup of coffee, and we sat and we talked.
So you're talking New York, New Jersey,
Connecticut.
Okay.
And whoever was further away, we spoke on the phone. And some women I spoke to for 3 hours, some women for longer. And many times it was the middle of the night, New York time, because they were calling from, the West Coast. But speaking to them, I found much more was a much better way than having them fill out a questionnaire and writing something to me.
How long?
And they were very grateful to have someone to speak to.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. How long a process? How long did you say, I will do this until I get 100 interviews? Did you say I will do this for 6 months, a year? How long did your gathering process go? Because my guess is sometimes, Carren, people get caught up in an idea for a story, a book, a topic. And the research, Liz and I often talked about how people who love to research get stuck in the research process. So what did you do to put some parameters on the research and then say, now it's time to write the story?
Well, I didn't have a number to start with, and I was blown away by the number of women that contacted me. And I had planned to put some ads in some papers. I didn't have to put them in. I took those out. But when I had more than 100 women, and again, I kept track, I had a spreadsheet of the questions I had asked everybody. How old were they when they realized? What was their marital situation? How much education had they had? Were they urban or suburban women? There were a great number of questions. And then when I spoke to them, it was free conversation, and they could tell me what they wanted to. So what I wound up doing was, I don't give each woman's story, but their categories. I'll have to backtrack a little bit.
Sure.
When I was at the Writers' Conference, I belonged to the International Women's Writers Guild, and one of the workshop leaders had asked for possible book titles. And at the time, I was working on an article for Ms. Magazine, and the title was Married Women Who Love Women. I wasn't yet out. And I was just too lazy to come up to create a new title, so I said, what about Married Women Who Love Women? And all of a sudden, there was a hush in the whole room. There were probably 50 or 60 women, and I thought, oh my God, I just outed myself, and now I'll be here all week and no one will talk to me.
Yeah.
But a woman timidly raised her hand, and she says, how does a woman make that discovery? Then another woman said, what does she do when she finds out? Then somebody else asked, what kind of men are they married to? How do their children deal with it? And I realized that if these women had these questions, then every woman had the same question. And those became my chapter titles. So when I spoke to the women, they told me what they wanted to talk about, they spoke about. And if they spoke more about their children, then those pieces went into the chapters from the children and about the children. If they spoke more about their husbands, it went into those chapters, etc. And that's how it came about. And my story threads through the entire book.
Okay. Then, so I'm guessing then that at some point you just felt there's enough information to proceed. And of course, now you mentioned the International Women's Writing Guild, which is where we met, where I got to know Liz. And that, your experience there tells me that, something I already know about the organization, but I definitely want people in the audience to know, this is an organization that is totally accepting and wonderful workshops. You can find lots of information at their website, iwwg.org. We'll talk about that on another show, but suffice to say, fabulous organization, and that little story you just told me is so typical, because these are women who are saying, sit back and say, how can I help her flesh that story out? What would be interesting? They're always willing to offer some advice.
Absolutely.
Now, but with this topic, Carren, you were really taking a personal risk. I mean, it wasn't not always as a topic as easy to talk about as it is now. It was a big personal risk.
I gave it a great deal of thought. And somebody up at the Writers' Conference playing devil's advocate said, what's more important, your family or this book? And it was really funny because
that's tough.
Years ago, my aunt had introduced me to an old neighbor of hers, and the woman took my hand and she looked me in the face and she said, and what do you do? And I said, I hope to be writing short stories. And she's looking at me and she says, you are meant to be writing women's issues. And I kind of chuckled to myself, because I wouldn't have known a woman's issue if I fell over it. I was so much in my little white picket fence.
Yeah.
Anyway, when this other writer asked me that question, all of a sudden this old woman's voice came back to me, and I heard her saying, you are meant to be writing this book. But I knew to write it, I had to do it honestly. For people to take it honestly, it had to be done honestly. And the only way that could be is if I came out to my family.
Oh, that had to be hard.
It was extremely difficult. But I'm very, very blessed. I have a family who truly practices unconditional love. and it's my immediate family and my extended family as well.
Now, in your family, you and your husband decided to stay married.
Yes.
So that, I would want to know what factors contributed to that decision.
Well, it was difficult at the beginning, and then I realized it had taken me several years to become comfortable with who I was, and it was only fair to give him time to adjust to it as well. And what I came to realize at the beginning, I was angry with him, like, why didn't he know? Why didn't he tell me? Like, he would know and I wouldn't. Anyway, I realized that he didn't know any more than I did. You know, it was just another dimension that I discovered about myself. And so we went through a difficult time. We had our ups and downs, and our daughter was planning to move out at the time to find her own apartment. And I said, well, let's just wait until she's settled before we tell them, because neither of us wanted her to think that she had to take care of one or the other. And what happened is we started talking, and we started becoming open and honest with each other. And our relationship has really gotten much better than it was. It's what I call a redefined relationship that we're in right now. And my daughter said to me recently, she said, of everyone I know, you and Dad get older than everybody else's parents. And I'm a lesbian. I'm not bisexual. But my husband is terrific, and he's extremely supportive.
So you work things
We've
out.
worked things out.
In a way that works best for each of you.
Well, the reality is that when people marry, sex is not number one on the totem pole. If you ask why people marry, they marry for companionship. They marry for economic reasons. They marry to be accepted by church and family. They marry to have children. And sex may be further down the line, number 5 or 6 or whatever. And if people realize that, it's not about the man, it's not about him being less than or more than. It's just another dimension that the woman has discovered.
But that was a decision you came to. Do you give advice to people who, in your book, do you say, here's what you should do if you are a woman and you discover yourself in this situation?
Everyone has to walk in their own shoes. The only thing I do say is, once you put it out there, you can't ever take it back. So give yourself the time and think about it and know what you're doing and where you're going. Many women who told me that they had planned to leave their marriages wound up remaining. Some who had planned to stay wound up leaving. Everyone's situation is different. And anybody who would assume to tell somebody what to do, I'd say don't listen to them. You have to make your own decision. Years and years ago, as soon as a woman realized that she was gay, the first thing she did was leave. But they don't have to do that. There are a lot of options. There are a lot of different redefined relationships.
Well, speaking of other relationships, let me ask you too, I understand that there's information about other relationships that created the necessity to write the second edition.
Right.
So what's in the second edition that was not in the first?
Well, there is a chapter on the redefined relationships, how various people are making them work, either divorced and sharing houses or not divorced and living in separate areas of houses. A number of different things work. But I got a lot of emails from women who were single lesbians. They were lovers of married women, and they said, what about us and what about our story? And so I started interviewing them for the second edition. And what was interesting, and I'm learning every day, I learn new things. One woman told me that she preferred being with a married woman because she was so far in the closet, this way nobody would know that she was gay. And this was the single woman.
Oh.
So everyone's story is different.
You know, and that says to me, too, about these layers and layers of protection that people feel the need for. And I think that's unfortunate today. And I understand 50 years ago, but it's sad today. And Carren, I want to bring up, we don't have a lot of time left, but there's a recent statistic in the news in Connecticut, and that, you're talking about bullying. And the statistic, I don't have the exact numbers, but that children who are bullied, approximately a little more than 40% are bullied because they are or are perceived to be gay or lesbian. Carren, is there any way that your experience and the writing of this book and making your experience available to other readers can help that situation, can help that statistic.
Oh, absolutely. I think education is the key. When the first edition to this book came out, women were buying it and hiding it under their jackets or putting other jackets over it. They were afraid to show it to somebody, afraid to show it to their husbands. And now everybody is buying it, men and women, because it's information. When I came out to my daughter, she told her friend, and then he came out to her. And she was the first person he had ever come out to. He said, "You made me feel comfortable enough to confide in you." And it's sad that young people aren't comfortable enough to be who they are. Yeah. What I've learned is that I can say to you, "Your hair looks really nice today," and you have two choices. You can say thank you, or you can say, "Oh, it didn't look nice yesterday." It's not what I've said, but it's the place where you are in your journey, how you choose to take it. And so many of these children that bully are in a very bad place of their own. Mm-hmm. They're not feeling comfortable with who and what they are, whether it's their sexuality or anything else.
You had a story that we talked about, before the show, about the incident at school and a conversation you had with a woman who was upset about the idea of a child having parents of the same gender. And we only have a minute or so left, but could you tell us that story?
Right. This is she's a wonderful woman. She's from Peru, and she has a beautiful little daughter who's got dark skin and black hair. And I said to her, when I'll change her name, when Mary goes to school, if there are only dolls with blonde hair and white skin, how is she going to feel? But if she can go to school and see a doll that looks like her, isn't that going to build her self-esteem? When a child has two mommies and goes to school and sees a book about her two mommies, or sees that her mommies are okay, that's going to build her self-esteem. And that's going to end all of, sounds simplistic, but once people are comfortable with themselves, they won't have a need to pick on anybody else. And we want everybody to be comfortable with who and what they are. Nobody's doing anything horrible. Years ago, if I showed you 3 crayons and said, "Here's red, yellow, and blue, what's your favorite color?" You're choosing from a limited palette. Mm-hmm. You haven't seen orange and purple and chartreuse and magenta. And it's the same with now that sexuality is becoming a topic that's being talked about. Women are realizing that there were other options, things they never knew before.
Carren, I think you truly are a gutsy woman. You have taken a brave step, and you have given the world, and in a large group, and the individuals, the families, the individuals, valuable information. And I think this is an example of one woman being able to change the world. Thank you very, very much for being on the show. Let me also say a thank you to my crew. And to close with the words of the fantasy writer, Ursula K. Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories." So find your story and find a way to tell it. And do join us again next time. Thank you.
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at page 1, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at page1tv.com.